It's good, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really excited to have Zarak here, my boy.
Hey man, how you
Thank
doing?
you so much for having me, bro. You have a sick fucking crib.
Really appreciate that, man.
First of all, before we get started, for everybody watching here, who are you, bro? Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, well, first of all, I am not an arms dealer. I am. I work in consulting, specifically around fashion and luxury advertising. I've been doing that for a few years now. It's something I really value and enjoy. That's really kind of lately, for the past few years, what's been taking up all of my time. So when I say fashion and luxury advertising, that around, revolves around media buying, consulting, general strategy, sometimes a creative work as well. And yeah, that's really what's become a passion of mine over the last few years. It's been a career as well, and I see myself doing it for the foreseeable future until, something else comes up.
Sweet. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today. This is literally the first podcast that I'm ever doing, so you're an exclusive guest, bro.
Honor and a privilege.
Yeah. So first of all, for everybody that's watching, we have a couple of different topics that I want to talk about. First of all, Zarak is a really, really unique character. So I want to spend some time talking about his business journey and also his mindset of how you approach business, right? Business and life and everything that's evolving around that. And then I want to specifically go into advertising for luxury brands and fashion brands, right? And then also talk about how is the market right now and how is it going to develop over the future for e-commerce. So thank you so much for introducing yourself, bro. Let's go a bit into the past. How did you get started with online marketing? What were like the first touch points that you had?
Yeah, so it goes back a few years. I was when I was 13 or 14. I was just a bit of background information. I'm classically trained in the piano, so I can like read and technically write music too. And when you're doing that, it's always classical piano. That's what I was kind of learning. That's what's typically taught. But I downloaded FL Studio, like I think everyone at some point does. But I downloaded it when I was 11, so I kind of got in a little early, and I was just producing music, just producing beats, background music, stuff like that. And I wanted to kind of find a way to make money off it. So that's where I kind of got into marketing because it was the first way to market it. So, we created the website. We found like a way to generate sales and reach out to people. So I guess in terms of like exposure to marketing, that was really my first piece of that. But then really kind of what followed next from that was publishing ads on Twitter accounts, those parody accounts you see on Twitter, or those like theme pages as some people may call them. That's what I was doing in 2012 all the way up to like 2015 or 2016. And that's when we were actually getting paid to advertise posts for people. Sometimes we would create products and brands to advertise on our own network. And it was a cool introduction to advertising because it took out the direct costs. You could grow a page for effectively free, and then you have the audience to sell to. Whereas, what marketing is now and what I do is you have to buy the ads. So it was a cool way to kind of get into it and experience it without having all these big costs which come with it now to get experience. So we kind of transitioned from music, which was finding a sales system and finding a way to get a product out there. We then took that to Twitter to kind of become the publishers and become the other end of that spectrum. And then, how that transitioned into fashion and luxury is I actually created a couple of brands, exited from those, and, that was centered around fashion as well. So I really wanted to work on what I understood. I've always been connected to that industry. I've always had an understanding of it. And I'm, a strong believer in if you're going to advertise something, you should really understand it and the industry around it. And it's easier to work around something if you're passionate about it too. So that's really the only reason I, chose fashion and luxury. It's not because it's a more fruitful industry to advertise in, not because it's easier to advertise by any means. It's probably more difficult. It's just I understand it, and I think that's really important when you're like working with brands and clients that you're both on the same page.
Interesting. So basically, you started making music, wanted to make some money online, and then got into the whole side of, okay, how can I market it to people?
Yeah.
And then it kind of transitioned into fashion. What would you say from like your earlier projects? What of the skill sets and mindset then really helped you what you're doing now with like fashion advertising?
I think from the music thing, it is when you're creating music, you have components. For example, in a drums, you have the hats, the snares, the claps, the kicks, the 808s. From like the instrument side of things, you might have strings, piano keys, leads, and whatever it may be. You have to select all of those sounds. So it's a very creative process. You have to pick every individual component, which means when you're doing that, there's a lot of thought which goes behind it. And I think when you're really thoughtful and considerate when you're doing something and building something, that transfers over to advertising in the sense where you have to have a justifiable reason behind every step of the process you take. And then from the side of like Twitter and marketing, that was a transferable skill of learning to work with a lot of people simultaneously and manage those relationships, which is, imperative in client-facing work today.
What I really like about the music, and we've also talked about this because I also have like a background in making a lot of beats,
Yeah.
like trap beats, hip hop beats, and stuff. And for me, it was always about kind of finding my own sauce, right? I really wanted to differentiate from what everybody else was doing because, like, you know, this too nowadays with like the music industry and how songs are being streamed on Spotify. Most of the songs are following the same pattern, the same drum patterns, the same sound selection. So
Yeah.
everybody is kind of sounding the same, right?
Yeah.
What would you say nowadays, especially in like luxury advertising, how important is it to find a differentiator and how much is applying same strategies or same principles?
I think, for luxury, you need to have a differentiator in the sense where you can sell cheaper, lower AOV products, and that's where you need more. I'd argue direct response principles and kind of getting a quick sale, similar to what you'd see in like, those cheaper looking ads, where they're built entirely with conversion and action in mind, but then you're compromising a lot in the aesthetics of the ad. Maybe you have a headline with a bunch of emojis in them, which might get a good click through, but it doesn't look nice. It's not pleasing. And I think when you're looking at luxury, you're kind of pleasing a different customer base. People who maybe are more cultured, they have more money, they're into different things. So I think you kind of do have to apply your own sauce, as you said. You have to have the exact same type of creatives. You have to try very hard to not look desperate. And sometimes you don't even push for a sale. You're just trying to get awareness out there, which is a big differentiator in advertising in luxury as opposed to advertising like a dog toy or something on Amazon. you know, um, you really just have to get the word out there, and you have to make sure the brand is perceived correctly, while also making it aesthetically pleasing. And there's kind of this fine point between, does it look nice and is it understandable, and will it still yield the action I want people to take? And it's finding that fine line. You cannot go on either side of the spectrum, and that's what kind of finding your source is.
I think that's a really interesting point because, as you said, like a lot of direct to consumer brands can just do ugly looking ads, right? that are following some direct response principles because they just want to sell a lot. They don't care about like the long term vision of it. And a
Yeah.
lot of the fashion brands, especially luxury fashion brands, they have a image to portray, right? They
Yeah.
have a brand image and brand awareness where it's super super important that they kind of stay in the lines because like they have to be in that differentiator. One thing that would be really interesting because it's such a unique space. How did you get your first client there?
Yeah, really interesting. So when I kind of had my exits, I sat on my ass and did nothing for like 6 months. Smoking weed and eating pizza every day was fantastic in retrospect. But I was young, and then I kind of worked at a company, a really really big fashion company as well, and that's where I did that for a very strategic reason, which is I wanted to make contacts and I wanted to get a deeper insight into the industry because I knew my work wasn't done. And one of my very good friends at that company, Lauren, she left and she worked at another company in the same field, but different product. And she reached out to me and said, "Hey, my new job really needs help with ads, and I know you do a really good job for Naked Wolf, which is the company I worked at. Can you please help us? We'll pay you." And this was kind of during lockdown, so I was already very tight on time, and I was like, "Let me think about it," which is like a nice way of saying like "fuck no," but I got a message again in a week. And she's like, "Look, we'll pay you. Just name a price." And then I kind of just gave a price which I thought was fair, and they said yes. And then I did it, and it just did phenomenally well for that brand. And then I kind of had this like eureka moment, which is like, hold on, why don't I just charge a bunch of companies to do this for them? And that's kind of where it kind of came off. So I was very fortunate and lucky. My first client came by way of referral. In fact, my first few clients came by way of referral, which I say it's lucky now, but I guess that's a product of like, publicly doing good work and showing those people I can kind of have that ability.
So from getting your first client to where you are right now, can you describe a bit the situation where you're in right now, just so for everybody to understand? I don't need you to mention specific numbers or revenue or
Yeah, no,
whatever.
absolutely. So we focus. I think there's a lot of stigma around Cyberspacewalk, especially around like advertising, which is the quality of work is not very good, and a lot of these large companies work on a churn and burn model, which is like, all right, people are consistently leaving, but we have such a good sales pipeline that more people come in. And that's always very unsustainable because you are reliant on your sales pipeline. But then you have like macroeconomic things which change, like a recession or whatever it may be. And then it's kind of difficult to keep that pipeline fed. And also, you don't really want to be losing relationships and gaining new ones consistently. So I was very, very cautious to grow the company very slowly, keep almost everybody and everybody ideally working with us. And I was always kind of under the guise of it's easier to take on fewer people slowly than it is to take on a bunch of people and rapidly expand. And I always had this view, which was I like to stay as like a boutique small company and have really intimate, you know, strategic relationships with my clients as opposed to just having hundreds of clients and hundreds of employees. That is not what I'm trying to build. I'm trying to build something that serves me and gives me what I need. So we grew slowly for a reason. At the beginning, obviously, we took on quite a few people at the very start just to kind of get things rolling. But ever since then, we only took on people when we really wanted to work with them. And even now, we don't do like outbound sales for like 9 months of the year. We prospect for 3 months of the year, and then those other 9 months, we just kind of grow who we're already working with. And that creates stronger relationships. And it's not so much about getting new clients in. For me, it's always about how can I make sure current clients are happy and they're not leaving.
Sweet. I really like how you kind of explained your mindset behind growing the company and really working with the clients that you have. Let's go more into that topic.
Okay.
From your perspective, what are some of the unconventional tips that you would get to people running a business or people starting a service-based business that you don't hear the mainstream talking about?
That's a good question. Unconventional. Trying to find something unconventional, which isn't illegal to say.
It doesn't have to be something that no one ever talked about. It's more like the mainstream stigma is you got to work hard and you got to spend all your time and focus and energy on it.
I think, focus entirely on the product and not on new acquisitions. I think a lot of agency and service-based business focuses on getting new clients in, and what you should really be doing is obsessing over the product and the service you provide. Obviously, with service-based businesses, there are going to be up times and down times. You're most likely going to do better in November and December than you are going to be in like February. And I think you really need to focus on communicating with clients. And also, you don't necessarily need a ridiculous outbound system to get new clients. You'd be surprised if every 6 months you just message your current clients who you've been keeping happy and saying, hey, we're looking at ways to expand the business. I'd really appreciate if there's anyone you could kind of send my way. And of course, we take care of you in exchange for that. And then you kind of have all these referrals coming in on autopilot. What if you could just do two things simultaneously, which you need to do anyway, which is get new clients and do good work? And then you can get referrals from your existing clients and they'll happily give them to you because you do such good work. Then you don't need to pay for like a million softwares and sales agents and lead generation agencies. Your work kind of speaks for itself. I think that's unconventional because most people don't speak about it. And I work with service-based companies too, and I rarely, if ever, get asked for a referral. But it's just such a nice way of doing business because there's this immediate trust which is built because these new clients trust you wholly because they've been referred to you by someone who they know and someone who they know is working well with you.
I think that's also a great way of differentiating yourself from other agencies in service-based business because everybody and their mother is going crazy on acquisition and outbound and sales teams and stuff.
Yeah, they'll increase your email revenue by 30%.
Yeah.
Or they'll give you your money back.
Yeah, and you're like obsessing over the product, which is really great. With all of the work that you're doing, what is your perspective on work-life balance?
I I think it's really important. I think it's not spoken about enough. I think there's this whole thing going on about you just need to grind and Sigma grind set or whatever it is, and just focus entirely on that. Don't do anything else. It is much more better to work less but much more efficiently than it is to work for the purpose of saying you've been working. And I think also we work so hard on our businesses and they reward us nicely and it's always fruitful. We have to kind of zoom out a little bit and breathe and look at why we do this. Why do we want to have businesses which make us money? Is it to take care of our friends and families and have good times with them? Is it to buy things that we need? Is it because we want to, be more philanthropic? Is it because we want to help our communities or whatever it may be? You know, Zoom out and think, why do you need the money? Why do you want the money? So if you're focusing entirely on the business and nothing else for years on end, number one, that's most likely going to tarnish a lot of the relationships you have, which isn't good. And I think you also need to kind of see the other side of things. I think you do need to take a break in just the name of efficiency. I think, if you have a separation from work and life, you'll be more powerful at work and you'll also enjoy life more because of the work you've been doing previous to it. I think it's really important to kind of, life is very much about, in my opinion, the people around you and what makes you happy. Work is simply a means to provide and do what you need to do. So to obsess over work, it can be a bit of a spiral you don't necessarily want to go down. I've kind of seen both sides of it. I think a work-life balance is extremely important. I think it's just naive to think that you should just focus on work, and you do need to kind of establish a fine line. It's sometimes easy to merge the two if you're very passionate about what you do. Like I know a lot of fashion designers who really just love what they do and they'll do it in their free time because it's a passion project of theirs too. And then you can kind of merge the two in a way which people conventionally couldn't do if they're an accountant. I mean, nobody enjoys being an accountant. If they say they are, they're lying. But I think in this field, I think it's just really good to have this separation in place.
I also always think that there are like different growth stages in the business, right? A lot of these gurus and coaches on social media tell you that you just gotta grind 24/7, right? While that, from my perspective, may be true in the beginning to build the momentum, let's say for the like first 1, 2, 3 years. But if you reach a certain stage of growth in your business, then you don't necessarily need to go hard, not see your family, not have a girl, not have any hobbies or friends, right?
Yeah.
At some point, you gotta find the way back into like a work-life balance and actually enjoying yourself. And I also think that in the beginning, most of the business owners start because they want freedom, they want money, they want to do a lot of fun things, and then they get into business, and then they kind of lose track of that, and then they turn into a machine that's just working, right?
I'd argue what I do takes more time out of my day than if I was just to simply work a job. And I think it's less about working less. It's not like I want to get into business so I can work less and have more free time. For me, it's always I want to have complete autonomy over my schedule and what I do. I'll happily work 10 hours, but if a couple of days I want to wake up at like noon and I can, that's the freedom I get, which a job perhaps wouldn't give me. And I also think, we need to quantify or reach some type of mutual agreement on like what does 1 to 3 years of grinding mean? Does that mean you're nonstop at your desk and you're only seeing people once a month? Does that mean you're working 10 hours a day and the rest of those are yours? I think everyone's definition of grind is different, but I think internally if you're working hard enough. And if you feel like you're not, then maybe you should kind of reassess how much attention you're putting in. But, there's definitely more work that's being put into it in the first few years. And it's a risk and a sacrifice, but it's one which I would take again and again.
Sweet. Now that you've been in business for a couple of years, right? A long time.
Yeah.
What do you love and what do you hate about being the business owner?
I love the money. No, I love what it can do. I love that. I love the freedom it gives my schedule on many occasions. I love that it has enhanced my ability to provide and protect my family. I love that it enables me to kind of get things which I wanted as a child earlier than I anticipated. I love the kind of cushion that it can kind of provide me and the comfort it provides me as well. And I love the adrenaline you sometimes get from when business goes up and down, not so much in the Cyberspace business, but in other businesses, things can be quite volatile. And I kind of love and thrive off that. It's not for everybody, but, I think people in business know what I'm talking about. And what I hate about business is in some aspect, the unpredictability it can sometimes bring, not in every type of business, but I'm sure there's business owners which have like absolutely no idea how much money they're going to receive next month. I hate that business can be an all or nothing game where you can be very successful or you could work for many years and kind of yield absolutely nothing. That's always a possibility. I hate sometimes the social stigma which comes attached to being a business owner, which is, if you go into a bar, for example, and you say, I'm a junior associate at like Deutsche Bank or something, it carries some status to it. Whereas you could be like an owner of a wood mill making millions and you can just say, I'm a business owner. And like, absolutely people don't care. I don't think people understand how difficult it is sometimes to work and create a business. And what I also hate sometimes about business as well is that you have to put on so many hats, especially as like a company owner. I love specific things about my business and I hate other things about doing it, but you have to at least understand or do all of them or have some form of involvement. Whereas say if I was a graphic designer and I love doing graphic design, all I'm really doing is graphic design at a company I work for. So you have to kind of put on these hats which you don't necessarily want to put on. And a lot of times in business, you're continuously putting on fires. So you have to really learn and adapt to the stress that running a business creates because it is different to that of many jobs. The business owner has like, just a completely different headspace they have to deal with. And sometimes it can be overwhelming with the stress you have to deal with. So you better get good at it. But I wouldn't trade it for anything else. And I definitely believe that the things I love about it by far outweigh the things I dislike about it.
Now that we talked a lot about like your current mindset and then also your journey, what would you say was the impact of your upbringing and your background on the success that you currently have in your business?
Yeah, I had a really, really, I think a lot of people who reach some level of success, say it was in spite of a rough upbringing. I had like a great upbringing. I have two parents. They're married. They've always been married. They have like a really good relationship. I grew up in like a stable family in a stable household. They worked very hard, and they provided, what they did. And I think seeing that in and of itself was quite inspiring as well. Because in order to have a family unit that strong, you need to have strong finances. A lot of relationships kind of collapse and a lot of divorces happen over money, So I think it's a really important thing in life and to be secure. Also, my dad was a business owner as well, not for all of his career, but for a decent amount of time he was, as was his brother. And I've seen my dad do quite well in business. And I've seen my uncle do not so well in business. And, I kind of grew up speaking to my dad about things like credit terms and finance and stuff when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. I really grew up around it. And I think it was an honor and a privilege to be around parents who were business minded or at least understood these concepts because they were able to teach me about it at a young age. And I attribute a lot of my success to them. I would never want to hide that. I never took any investment or anything from them, but I think they instilled into me knowledge, which I otherwise would not have had. And I was consistently getting that knowledge as I was growing up as a child, which, I'd be a fool to say wouldn't help. It definitely helps.
Interesting. I really like that you shared that so openly because I feel like a lot of the stuff that you see online, they want to kind of create a certain narrative, right? You
Yeah.
gotta have a rough upbringing, you gotta have XYZ, you gotta do this in the business. It's not a like one way that leads people to success or like one route that everybody takes or like every successful person has taken, right? It's like so many individual cases, right? Like you're the perfect example for you're the perfect upbringing, like a good parent household and
Yeah.
everything, and they taught you a lot, right?
Yeah. I saw this tweet the other day. Some guy was like, I was growing up and my mother was going into the McDonald's bins and picking out food for us to eat. So you didn't have to say all that. You could have just said she was struggling. You didn't have to go into that much detail. And I think, people, really are just going into everyone kind of, I feel like a lot of people want to be oppressed and have this like rags to riches story. And I think it's equally valuable if you just had a normal life to riches story. I think those are kind of cool too. And, I think while it's extremely impressive for someone to be brought up in like really bad circumstances and be as successful as they are, I would never lie about it or exaggerate it. Like my upbringing was fun. I enjoyed it.
Really good. Now, over the course of your whole business career, what was the most difficult moment that you found yourself in?
Probably when I was overseas and my Stripe account got suspended. And like I was living overseas and my Stripe account got suspended, which means like, and you know, I was 18 at the point, and my only income was what I was getting paid from my business, which was through Stripe. And I wasn't too worried about it, so I just created a PayPal account, and my PayPal account like got suspended for some like pretty soon after as well. So I was living overseas with bills due, which would otherwise be very easy to clear. And then all of my income suddenly stops. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll just use my money to cover any expenses I have. But then there's no more money coming in. And then after like 3 months of struggling to like find a replacement payment processor, it's very easy now, by the way. 7 years ago, it was like not as easy to find a payment processor to kind of take you on, especially when you're living overseas and they want like your documentation for most of this. So I'd say the most difficult part of my business was when like the money literally stopped coming in, but we still had to pay for fulfilling things and doing orders and whatever it may be. That was very difficult, extremely stressful. And then the other, probably the most stressful point in my business is, and it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually is. It's when we started this company, Diamond Goose, and we got like a really big contract. Not big like in today's scale, but back then it was a pretty big contract, like a 1 month in. And it was also the first, and I believe like one of the only clients over all of these years to ever leave us. And it was just so demoralizing to lose your client when it was like only a few months into the business, and it was one of the first clients you ever got. And that was like the first downside I saw to this. And I'm actually really happy it happened, because we really focused in on our communication and like our service level. And over 3 years and all these clients now, because we focus so hard on it, you know, I think we've like only ever lost like 2 contracts ever. But it's very demoralizing at the point in time, and it was like kind of a low point in the career, because I finally felt like I had something I genuinely enjoyed doing and it was treating me very well. And it was a brand that I really loved as a kid as well. So to kind of lose a contract like that, kind of a low point as well. But definitely not as low of a point as like losing your income and still having the same outgoings. That's not fun at all. And also, you know, I was like 18, 19. It was like, if that happened today, it'd be very, very easy to deal with. If it happened back then, you know, it comes as like a shock all at once. And it kind of highlighted, you know, this isn't all just fun and games. There's high stress situations and fires that you got to put out. And if you take too long to put those out, you're done.
Yeah. I think nobody talks enough about the high stress situations that you find yourself in, with like all of the responsibility that you have for like your employees, the clients,
Yeah.
and you're like the one point as the business owner where everything comes together
Yeah.
as like a service-based business.
Yeah, it's super important, and there's just so many things which can go wrong at the same time. And you know, at the end of every week, you almost think, you know, we live to see another day, because there's just so much stuff in the background which people don't see, which you have to take care of. But again, if you learn how to deal in high stress situations, you can thrive in an environment like that. Then it makes it much easier for you.
I think the one good aspect about high stress situations is that if you manage to go through those situations and come out on top,
Yeah.
then it's almost too easy in like regular situations without all the stress. You're like, where's the stress, bro? Where, like, give me a problem.
Yeah, no, I feel that sometimes, you know, I do it sometimes when like it's like middle of a Monday and I'm like, hold on, this day's gone by a little too smoothly. I'm just waiting for like something just catastrophic
Yeah.
to happen. I'm waiting for it. And sometimes like a couple of days will go by and like just nothing bad happens. And I'm like, you know what? This is a little boring. I need like a disaster to happen by Wednesday morning.
Yeah, sweet. I really appreciate you sharing all that stuff from like your journey and the mindset. Let's take some time to focus on what you're doing right now, which is advertising for these high-end brands, like the luxury brands, right?
Yeah.
Before we go into the topic, I would like you to kind of draw the context of what is what is the field? What are the common traits? What do you see in the business? Just for like the people to understand. What's the market like for these luxury brands? Like what do you gotta watch out for when working with them?
Yeah. So I think ultimately, luxury, and I want to talk about what separates luxury brands from like regular e-commerce brands right now, which is the timeline of acquiring a customer. If you are drop shipping, boner pills or something, I don't know, whatever, you really just want to sell your product and kind of move on, and you don't really want to focus on acquiring that customer to come back and again and again and again. Because for low quality service and products, that just typically doesn't happen. And it's also the timeline of when you want someone to buy something and how long you can wait. With luxury products, they will advertise to you, and if you buy in 5 to 10 years, that's absolutely fine. Luxury brands look at things with the scope of longer time frames of acquisition, not necessarily because they can afford it, because the product is more expensive. Because I think a misconception is these products are also significantly more expensive to make in most cases. But the benefit that brings you is it allows you to advertise more efficiently and more thoughtfully because you have this longer time frame of acquisition. And I think also a lot of advertisers come with conversion first, everything second, whereas conversion and action and the appearance have equal weighting in an ad in the luxury industry. As far as like what the landscape is and how things are looking right now, I mean, if we go back in 2022 when the market went down pretty substantially on just a macroeconomic level, luxury actually did quite well. It wasn't really impacted the same way, funnily enough, as like Gen Z focused brands. They're somewhat recession proof for the most part. It's difficult to say what's going to happen this year, but if I just go on Q1, which just passed, probably like the best quarter for most luxury brands they've ever seen in a very, very, very long time. Recessionary environments typically impact, the working and the middle class before they affect the type of people who are purchasing these high-end products. I think another misconception as well is that these products are priced at a luxury price point and they're for a specific type of audience, but it's not actually wealthy people who are buying the products. It very much depends on a brand, and when a luxury brand becomes, not necessarily mainstream, but just recognizable on a global scale, like we're talking Louis Vuitton and Gucci, well, these brands are so well known that you have all different types of people wearing them. When you have like more boutique luxury brands or luxury brands where it's not so obvious what it is that you're wearing, typically the vast majority of your customer base is exactly who the brand wants to be buying the product. Whereas when you're at a brand at like Gucci scale, you have an archetype of someone who you want buying a product, but really you have no idea who actually is. And I think, they're doing quite well in these environments because they're not so impacted by what's happening around them. And I think that's beneficial. But similarly, they don't see wild stages of growth in like 2020 when the lockdowns happened, which other brands might have. Luxury was fairly consistent. So we didn't have like the benefit of that big e-com boom in that industry specifically. Similar to like Gen Z fashion brands. These people get student loan payments coming in and they don't own their houses or their cars. So they don't have these energy bills and the implications of a cost of living crisis impacting them. So they're also thriving in a recessionary environment as well. So I think to walk along those verticals is, really beneficial for me as a business owner, and also, of course, really beneficial for them because they can thrive in environments where everything else is supposedly contracting.
What I find really interesting is you just talked about that these luxury high-end brands, they work on a way different scale and strategy, right? They have like longer term layouts in terms of how they advertise.
Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest difference in terms of advertising between these luxury brands and then usual D2C brands, for example, like consumable products and like lower end products?
100%. It is 100% the creative and what you put out there. I'll give you an example. Like, a lot of direct to consumer and CPG brands, they will focus on conversion fast content, big headlines, a lot of social proof, a lot of UGC, which are creative formats which luxury brands would never use, despite I'm sure there's plenty of evidence which suggests that UGC does work well and social proofing does work well. And these uglier looking ads, or at least these more playful ads, working in their favor. A luxury brand would never do that because they would never tarnish the brand's equity in exchange for revenue to come in. So they don't want to leverage those type of things. And I think that's like the major difference. With a CPG and a DTC brand, the theory very much is if it works on an ad, you should run it because it makes more revenue. Whereas with a luxury brand, there are hundreds of things we could do in the ad which would make more money, but it tarnishes the brand's value and equity, which they would never do in exchange for some quick cash injections. And I think thinking with that lens is super important in terms of longevity and perception. DTC brands could be, leveraging TikTok creators all the time and making playful content around them. A luxury brand would not necessarily want to do that because it doesn't speak their tone. And I think, sacrificing a quick gain in exchange for longevity is, really what separates the brands which are going to go bankrupt in the coming years with the ones which are going to thrive for generations to come.
So you as an advertiser in this space, how do you adjust the strategies that you do for advertising for them in terms of regular D2C brands that you just talked about?
I don't really focus on a bunch of D2C brands. I'm aware of the tactics they use and what they do, but I think from an advertiser point of view, I could get into account structure, but if we just go into creative, we have to very much be a little more conservative with what we put out there. And we have to kind of have it through a lens of look at it like a billboard or an awareness ad. Don't look at it like some internet pop-up or something which we want to see if people click through immediately. We have to put a lot of attention into simply, does the ad look nice? Will people see it? As opposed to, can we get this conversion at this time from these people? I think also what's important is you have to be very specific with like where you place the ads. With a direct-to-consumer brand, you can be a little more open where things go. For example, we would never use the Facebook right-hand column, or we would never necessarily use Google partner websites because you don't know where your content is going and you don't want to be next to propaganda content. And we would never put it on things like Snapchat because Snapchat, if you go on the discovery page, there's a bunch of weird stuff around it, which is definitely not on brand. So you have to be very careful with placements, very careful with creative and tone, and absolutely under no means can you kind of put an ad where it shouldn't be. And it's about creating this fine line almost as if it's like some equilibrium point between, is this going to work? And will people understand what it is? And then the third point being, will we at some point yield an action? It doesn't have to be right now. So it's very much looking through the lens of, are we giving a good impression as opposed to, can we get them to click? That is the biggest separator.
What I find really interesting about the stat, they're so overprotective with their brand, right? Yes. It's not only about how do you advertise and what's the strategy and what are like do's and don'ts, but also what is the environment of where people will see the ad and have touch points with the ad, right?
Exactly, yeah.
This is also what I see from doing conversion rate optimization for like those kind of brands and the websites. Same with what you said, you have stuff that works really well, right? Like social proof or scarcity or urgency or something like that, those kind of strategies. But then if you would use them, it would tarnish the brand's image, right? Yeah. So it's more about factors like exclusivity or like a high price point, or really kind of portraying this emotion and like this brand feeling. How would you say, like, what is your approach for really delivering this in the ad? Like, what's a good strategy of kind of capturing the feeling, the emotion, and like this exclusivity that these luxury brands have in the creative format?
Yeah, so I think just going back quickly to what you said, I think the biggest barrier in luxury is the price point for people to buy. And we'd always get messages from like buy now, pay later services. And I think that's like a very strong example of, obviously the conversion rate would go up if it's easier for people to buy because we could get more customers. But the whole point is it's not meant to be something that you should finance. It's something that you should just be buying outright. And you see it on like a high level scale. If you go on like Watches of Switzerland, if you go on their website, they're always going to advertise that you can like pay monthly for a watch. But then when you go into the Patek section or the Audemars section or the Rolex section, they don't allow any financing of any type on their watches, and it's not because of the price point. It's because they don't want customers to do that with their brand. In terms of how we deliver something on a luxury point of view, it has to really be aligned with the brand tone and exactly. I think it's very important to have an archetype in mind when you're creating something, which is sometimes difficult in this environment when you have like ASC and PMAX campaigns where it's kind of just casting a wide net, which means your targeting very much is dictated by the creative you have out there. So, for example, if you have a shoe brand, your archetype is women with very high-end jobs living in New York City. You have to make maybe contemporary content with this specific color gradient, which really speaks to them, and not necessarily what is going to get them to take an action, simply what speaks to them. Similarly, if you have a brand which does like very high-end leather bags for men or whatever it may be, you have to just do content which resonates, but not necessarily what creates an action, under the hope that the content resonates so well that they will place the action themselves. And it doesn't have to be now, it can be in their own time, and it can be down the line. So it's very much focused on the creative itself, and the demographics and stuff that you select within the targeting. We don't necessarily want to cast a wide net when we are doing the targeting for some luxury brands, because we don't necessarily want everybody to see those ads. If you're a customer of Brioni and then your unemployed friend who's been unemployed for 10 years is getting Brioni ads, it makes Brioni look bad as well. So you have to be very specific with who you're showing these to, and you don't necessarily want to cast a wide net when doing so. Whereas with DTC and CPG, it's really, whatever content works and whoever sees it can buy it, we don't mind. We'll show it to everybody hoping people will bite, and then maybe we can kind of niche down from there. Whereas with luxury, it's very much, start as you mean to go on, and make sure it's in front of the right eyes, not just any eyes. I think that's something which is the opposite of what a lot of people are doing in advertising right now, but it's, I must iterate how important it is to not cast wide nets when you're advertising to these type of people and audiences, and when you're pushing these specific types of products. You don't want to show it to everybody. You have to make sure that, you can present some type of, or allude to some type of exclusivity, or present some exclusive undertone in your messaging. You have to also follow through on that and actually be exclusive.
I feel like there's a commonality between your mindset of how you conduct business and how these luxury brands advertise.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're so super focused on obsessing with like a high quality product, and then also a relationship driven business. Same with these luxury brands, right? They are not advertising with a direct response style where they want to get everybody to take an instant action. Yeah. They are fine with investing into these relationships for years and years and years, right? And then over time, people are going to buy, and they have the long-term vision of like building the brand awareness, and then attracting the right customers.
Yeah. It's kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, which is, we understand the industry, and it is one which we are kind of part of ourselves. I would not sell dog toys, and, today I would not be selling like protein powder, and I wouldn't be selling, and not to say these products are bad, it's just not something which is of interest to me. I want to be selling like CPG and generic household items. We want to work with luxury because it's something I understand. And I also believe that if you conduct business practice with that lens, for me, it works, maybe not for everybody. So we try and keep the site looking beautiful, not necessarily the easiest to navigate, and not necessarily with all of the links and the calendar links or whatever it may be. But we like to keep it exclusive. But that's not just an illusion, that really is how we conduct. If you are referring business to us, they have to have 2 referrals and not 1. So you have to somehow know 2 clients. We do not do any, random DMs to people or random outreach. Everyone is selected. And we don't just take on clients throughout the year because it's important that we don't. My interest is not to get as many clients as quickly as I can. My interest is to build strong relationships with fewer people. It's, number 1, easier to deal with, and number 2, I think the rewards will be higher in the long term. I'm not trying to make a bunch of money and grow hyper fast in the next 2 years. I just want to make sure that I'm thriving today and in 5, 10, 15 years down the line. That's what's really important to me.
I really, really like that. You just touched on this a bit. What do you think? How can the different services slash the different areas in the business strategy complement each other, right? Because you've talked about the advertising a lot. Now you've just talked about the website a bit. And then they also have certain retention strategies, right? So how would you say for these kind of brands, do they complement and also work together?
That's a good question. I think it all comes down to like focusing on product. And what I mean by that is a lot of the concerns that business owners have and a lot of the issues which come their way can be answered by product. And I think we don't really have to look far to see how that makes sense. I mean, there's always this misconception that when Google releases a service on their phones and Apple doesn't do it for 3 or 4 years, it's because Apple's technology is behind. It's not because it's behind, it's because they're working on perfecting it and making it trouble free, and Google may be working on bringing it out immediately. So I think there's been this whole discussion of like move fast and break things and startup culture, and I don't think it's necessarily sustainable, especially when if you really break my business down, it is managing other people's money and growing it for them. That is really what it is. So you don't have the privilege of moving fast and breaking things. You have to move slowly and thoughtfully. I don't also think that the strategy is valuable for every brand and every service-based provider. It depends on what the goals and objectives are. And it also depends if they have a service which can necessarily back up, you know, what their price point is and what their customer base is. There's different demands for different types of companies, and there's going to be different people serving different sections of the market. But I really like to dedicate my time to serving the high-end companies and the luxury companies and focusing very, very hard on product. If I didn't focus so much on product, we wouldn't be able to do it, and we'd be in like some different type of vertical, like I don't know, TikTok content or something, or like SMS marketing. But and I think this is something that you can kind of say as well. There's not a lot of CRO companies compared to like email companies, because CRO is significantly more difficult in many ways. You have to know how to code for many ways. There's a lot of A/B testing. It's a very different service. And you have to focus much more on product if you're in CRO than if you're doing like SMS, because it's just so many more layers to it. It's more complex, and its implications are much higher as well.
What I find really interesting in talking with you about this whole luxury brands, high fashion brands, advertising topic is that they really think about the long-term effect, and they really plan out for years and years, right? So for us, like the difference in working with these direct to consumer brands like that go really heavy on direct response is that they always focus on like 3 to 6 months, right? And they wanna scale fast, and they over obsess with the revenue and like driving more revenue, right? It's not
Yeah.
like they have a 5, 10, 15 years vision. And
Yeah.
also what I found was that when I was consulting a concierge service from London that I told you about, Harper Concierge, they work with all of these luxury brands like
Oh
Victoria
yeah.
Beckham, Sartor Ferragamo, Dior and stuff. And it was so much fun because I really had to understand how can we apply conversion rate optimization in this whole field of luxury higher end brands, right?
Yeah.
And it's so different because in typical direct response brands, I would go super, super hard on social proof, creating trust, having a lot of these kind of elements.
Yeah,
And
because
then
it does
also,
work. Yeah.
yeah, and kind of like pushing them, like creating the urgency, creating the motivation, like really digging into their pain points
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
desires and stuff. And for like
Yeah.
these luxury brands, it's completely different.
I think it's just very key in the messaging, and you must really think about it, and it sounds simple. And nothing these direct response brands, CPG brands that they're doing is wrong. It's just a different audience. They have to have different tactics. It's just not in my interest. That's all. The messaging for a direct to consumer brand is very much, will you buy my product? I want you to buy my product. And the messaging typically for a luxury brand is, you want my product. Can you get my product? And I think that's very, very important, and they're very different things. And they're equally as difficult to portray in ads and through aesthetics and through design and through things like CRO. They're very different messages, and they're equally as difficult to kind of yield results for. But yeah, like all these things work. You wouldn't necessarily do them, and I guess it's about discovering that fine line where it works, but it's not impeding on the brand. For example, you might put on a website from the CRO point like money back guarantee, and that might increase the conversion rate. I don't know. I'm guessing it usually does, but you would never put that on like a high end website because money back guarantee suggests that you might want to return the product and we have to refund you. But with a luxury product, it's like, no, why would you even consider returning the product? You know, you worked very hard for this product. You've been wanting it for ages. It's not even something you would allude to the customer. Even though for a completely different business, it probably yields good results because it gives confidence in the purchase they're about to make. But yeah, it's just two very different industries.
And that's what I find so interesting because you, as kind of like the brain behind it, have to think about all of the ripple effects of your actions, right? If you advertise in a certain way, or if you, for example, put the money back guarantee on the website, you have to think about second and third and fourth order consequences of like what you're doing, even if in the beginning it may work good and drive more sales and revenue.
Yeah, you know, there was a funny moment at a company I was working at, Naked Wolf, and Klarna was reaching out to us, and Klarna's like a buy now, pay later service. Naked Wolf shoes are like, you know, 250 to like 500 a piece, so like, you know, they're bordering high end prices here. And there's a very simple thing which you would say: does Louis Vuitton use it? That's not to say that Louis Vuitton has a perfect website or the perfect strategy. They're a much older brand. They have different strategies, but there are still notes that we can suddenly take. And, you know, my view from a technical point of view at the time was, well, if we have Klarna, we're going to get more sales because now it's more affordable to people. And the simple response is, does Louis Vuitton use it? No. So neither will we. Yeah.
I might use it in the future. Does Louis Vuitton do it or no?
Yeah.
That's a good mental framework.
It's a really good framework. Like, do they do it? Whereas you look at the biggest e-commerce website in the world, Amazon, they have all like these amazing CRO tactics, which don't necessarily look nice, but they're doing it because it works.
Now, to kind of round up this discussion conversation, I want to talk about the market and also even focus more on the future of e-commerce. Yeah. You kind of talked about this, is that we are in a recession phase right now. We have been kind of in an economic downturn over the past couple of years. And I want to talk about how did it affect the market, and also what do you think from your perspective, how are the next, let's say, for example, 5 years are going to look like?
So I think the future of e-commerce overall, I think it is on the positive. I think it's important we begin with that. I think what was a gift and a curse to the industry was in 2020 when everything just grew so exponentially, quicker than it was originally meant to. And I think it wasn't necessarily that things were going down in 2022 on an overall scale. It was just they were correcting themselves back to what they should have been. I think people are going to be focused more on buying things consciously, and I think we're also seeing a shift in consumer behavior, which is, let me not buy the cheapest thing and the most convenient thing, but let me buy things more meaningfully, which will last me a long time. Which means I think brands will have to focus on quality and product more. I think they'll have to focus on marketing more. I think there will always be a place for things like Amazon for utility-based purchases. You know, if I need to buy like a stapler, I don't really care who the stapler comes from. I just need to staple things. But when I buy, for example, clothing or shoes or like homeware or whatever it may be, you know, you look at things more consciously. So I think global e-commerce is kind of going to grow. Also, a lot of brands in the West have not embraced, you know, selling things overseas in places like China, where it is a huge and growing market. So I think just naturally the global industry will kind of see a lot of benefit from it. I think in terms of specific brands, I think they're definitely going to die as well, though, based on unsustainable practices. I think, you know, as the industry it will grow, but I think specific practices are poisoning brands, which is going to kind of cause them to collapse. I think that's reliance and not diversifying. I think a lot of brands in the early ages were like very dependent on Facebook ads or Google ads and nothing else, and it was fueling the business. You know, you're living on rented land, and as these ad prices go up and down, it could take your business out in the process. So I think if brands aren't diversifying, I think, you know, but I also think these early days still, I think people are still learning and kind of figuring a lot of these things out and realizing that there aren't any best practices, generally speaking. But I do also believe that it might get worse before it gets better. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get worse for everybody. I just think on an industry level, some brands over the next couple of years are going to thrive, and I think a lot of them are going to kind of go out of business. And that's not necessarily entirely due to macroeconomic pressure. It's also just because they were creating practices which weren't really sustainable. And once there's a little bit of change in consumer sentiment, those practices are really going to kind of come to light, and it's going to highlight the flaws in the business, creating it to be unsustainable, and they'll kind of be out. But I think once that happens, and Shopify and WooCommerce and whoever it may be develop their ecosystems, and we get a better understanding of logistics and the supply chain corrects itself, and there's more open ways to find trade partners and factories and all this new technology which will come and supplement this industry. I'm very bullish on it, and I think it's going to do exceptionally well. But I think it's very important that it's contingent to many other things happening, which I have no control over.
Would you say that over the past couple of years there has been a number of brands who have been lucky because of the market situation, and
Yeah.
now they're failing because they weren't built for a longer term situation?
Yeah, and I don't think this is the first time people got lucky. I think a lot of brands got lucky in the earlier years too. Um, but I think a lot of brands benefited from this COVID boom, and they're unsure how to handle it now. Perhaps they overhired. Perhaps there was just a lot easier access to venture capital back then too. So a lot of these unsustainable practices are no longer being funded. And I think making access to capital more difficult is definitely going to have a big impact on this industry. I also think just a change in VC sentiment and shifting from more software to software based companies is going to have a major impact. I think seeing a lot of this IPO performance highlights how careless and reckless a lot of these companies were with their budgets and their efficiency. And I think on a large scale we're seeing a lot of these brands grow exponentially, and we're seeing that it's not working out, and maybe it's because they got lucky. But the same thing happened to brands in 2016 and 2015 when ads were just so much cheaper and less regulated than they are now. And perhaps they got lucky because you could afford to do bad practices and no real strategy and still, win. Whereas right now you really need to do things thoughtfully. So I think it's just a different generation of companies which were winning in, despite their bad practices, which are now kind of coming to light. But I think the biggest impact to that is there are a lot of venture-backed companies which were simply just spending their way in to grow, and they weren't thinking about how to do it profitably. But never was the question raised of, can we do it profitably ever or at all? And in many cases, I think the answer is no. And I think they're going to find that out. I think a lot of them are already bankrupt or on their way to bankruptcy. But I don't think they're a fair representation of, blue collar e-commerce work, which is, it is a very much a blue collar industry in many ways. And I think these companies, have given it a bad name, put it in a bad light. They've made ads more expensive for everybody else. They did unsustainable things, and they're going to go down. But I still think the industry as a whole has been thriving, not only for the past few years, but really a couple of decades almost. eBay very much, paved the way back in the day in the early 2000s. We've grown exponentially from there. We had huge logistical changes when Amazon Prime got introduced, which really meant we'd get things in a day or sometimes in the same day. I know Shopify is working on their fulfillment logistics. I think things are looking up. But like many industries, you're going to highlight some bad characters on the way there.
You just touched briefly on this topic. What are your concerns about certain trends in the market? Something like Shopify, for example, is enabling drop shipping. And there are a lot of players in the market that enable drop shipping, or that put a lot of focus on this, which, as you said, it's kind of putting trends into the advertising channels, for example, right? You see certain ads, you see certain trends, and then also you see that the consumer behavior is shifting because they are getting more skeptic, for example, or they're kind of getting used to it and catching up on this trend of, if I buy a product, it has a 10 to 14 day shipping time, and it comes in a box from China, and it's just a shitty product. They are maybe going to buy less in the future from these online stores after they've seen an ad.
It was a really risky bet from Shopify when they did that in 2016, 2017, and debatable to even say if it was a gift. It was a bet that was successful. It was a double-edged sword, really, right? Because on one end, they are promoting people to get into business and start a business, but it was an unsustainable business which they were promoting to people. And the reason they did that is because it's so cheap to get into. And I believe Shopify's kind of messaging was, experiment with this and then eventually buy inventory and have like a real business centered around it. Most people didn't do that. And it also was very risky because these people were not business owners. They were not operators. They don't know how to do customer service and whatever it may be. So it really creates a bad environment for the end consumer. And they might be like, oh my God, if I just bought this on Amazon, it would have been here, yesterday. And now I have to wait 2 weeks for this subpar product from China, and this company is not even replying to my emails. Who do I speak to? It created a lot of issues. I think Shopify should have focused more on the messaging of, do this as a taster and then build it into something that's real. And I think Shopify didn't provide enough resources at the time to show people how to do that. I think also Shopify, and it's also an issue because Shopify was a high growth tech company. And one of the metrics that they look at in high growth tech companies is how many new users did you acquire? Well, they have to kind of get away from commercial and enterprise marketing to do that. They have to kind of make it a consumer product. So like, hey, make money online, sell products without having to buy them, join Shopify. They've consumerized the products, get a bunch of new people in, and in the process, they've created some really good entrepreneurs. But it was a very risky bet. And, they even acquired like Oberlo, which is like a big drop shipping platform. And Shopify's kind of shifted away from it now because they just shut Oberlo down completely. But, drop shipping and stuff like that was what really fueled Shopify. And the one benefit, I guess, of it is it brought a lot of people to the industry, which I think is good too. But, some things are not meant to be consumerized.
What are your thoughts on the future of e-commerce?
I think it's going to be looking good. And I think, as I said, it's going to probably get worse before it gets better. But I think overall as an industry, we're shifting away from bad, things like drop shipping, and we're focusing on building brands and companies. And, when you pair that with the market is a really good regulator in a sense. I think if you had like a drop shipping website 6 or 7 years ago, most people wouldn't know. And now if you made one, I think most consumers would know. Consumers get more intelligent every year. And they're a really good way of regulating the market to make sure like one of these bad actors kind of come into play. And I think also just generally people are kind of shifting away from that, building actual brands. And I think, it's not really a case of just direct to consumer product. Is it Shopify? I think Etsy and Amazon are equally helping people get into the space and grow it exponentially. Amazon's work in logistics is phenomenal. Etsy's barrier to entry is great. eBay's ability to understand the principles is fantastic. And Shopify, if you really want to build a personalized brand around everything and what you're selling, it's good. But I think it's still early stages for the most part. In the grand scheme of things, I think it can be significantly better. But I think there's just some things that need to be handled first, like logistics, because there's big companies like Mr. Porter, the Net-a-Porter Group, Amazon, which they have the logistics nailed down. That's something we need to fix on. I think sustainable growth is something a lot of companies need to figure out, and if they ever do, that's a different question. But, I would say this is pretty early on, despite seemingly having worked in it for years and years. I'm still very bullish on what's to come next. And I think these companies are continuously innovating too. They're not kind of resting their laurels. So whenever companies are innovating, typically it's a good thing for us in the wider space because it creates new opportunities. And I think it's going to look very different even 5 years from what it is today. And I think a lot of people are going to have to adapt.
Sick. Bro, I really enjoyed this conversation with you. The last question to round this up, what are you most excited for the future?
To retire and never have to do any of this ever again. This is still business. And as I said earlier, there's a work and life balance. Well, I significantly prefer life than to work. So as excited as I am for the industry, and as much as I love the progress that's being made, and as much as I love the clients, I don't want to be doing this when I'm 10, 20, 30 years down the line. What I'm really excited about is I hope that business continues to grow and does well. So one day I don't have to do anything at all.
Perfect. Thank you.
My man.